My name is Joe Price. I'm a product manager at The Post. I work on audio and podcast. I work on voice assistants. And people, so we got a podcast fan in the audience, great. Happy to take questions about that afterwards. And I also work on bots and messaging, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that afterwards. But I want to focus for this talk on voice assistants. I think it's one of the most fascinating and exciting areas of technology right now. And we in the Washington Post have been doing a lot of experiments over the last year. I want to walk you through our experiments. I want to get you to think a little bit like a product designer. And I want to show you our failures so you can learn from them and you can do, and so you can, when you launch on these platforms and when you're teaching your students to launch on these platforms, they don't have to make all the same mistakes we did. So talking about voice assistants, this is some of the early Alexa Echo hardware family. Amazon recently announced some new platforms, some new devices that include a screen as well. And to put some numbers out there, according to an NPR and Edison research report that was released last month, about 5% of US homes have an Alexa device today. About 2% of homes have a Google Home device. So everybody in this room who raised their hands during John talk, when asked about this, we totally over-index in terms of who has an Alexa device. And I'm using a couple different words interchangeably. So Echo, that's the hardware. Alexa, that's the software. And what's really exciting about this is I describe this as the new front for ambient computing. This is computing that takes the things that we want to do, our human capability, and it allows us to do them with minimal friction via intermediate technology. The technology disappears. It just blends into your life seamlessly. So what are some things you can do with that? You can ask Alexa how old Molly Ringwald is. If you have a question, you just ask it. You can use it to play the latest episode of your favorite TV show, like Stranger Things, coming back any minute now. You can use it, if you have a hooked up home, you can use it to turn your lights on or off, to secure your door, to open up your door. And what excites me about this technology is that voice interaction is the shortest distance between thinking something and taking an action on it. People just love talking to computers, and because they don't have to think that much. They just think and do, and it's all so friction-free. But that means, what does that mean for news? And so I want to walk you through some of the experiments that we've been trying to figure out. What does it mean for someone to think about the news and ask about the news, and how can we serve those users? So before I get to the lessons, I want to do some just basic definitions. I just want to ground us in the technology a little bit. And so here's just kind of 4 categories of things that Alexa can do. So first, what I describe as native interactions. These are things that are kind of baked into the root level. So Alexa, tell a joke. What's the weather? Set a timer. That's stuff that Amazon controls. They're curating that experience in its totality. Then there's integrations. That's when it's going to a third-party source. For example, playing a podcast is going to go to TuneIn. Playing music, it's either going to go to an Amazon-provided service or it's going to go somewhere like Spotify, for example. That's an integration. There's smart home stuff. I won't really talk much about this now, but it's one of the, I think, coolest things you can do and one of the things that really make you feel most powerful using this platform, being able to change the temperature, for example. And then there's, I think, the kind of most intriguing aspect of integration, which is custom skills. So Alexa, play Jeopardy. Alexa, open Oprah Magazine. Alexa, open the Washington Post. Those red words that you can see right here, those are the actual skill names. Those are the third-party experiences produced by people like me on these platforms that will basically allow an app-like experience on Alexa. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a second. And then finally, unique to this platform is a whole new content type that Amazon created, and it's called the flash briefing. You summon it by saying, Alexa, what's in the news, or Alexa, what's my flash briefing? And then Alexa will jump into a list of your favorite micro podcasts. These tend to be podcasts that are between 3 to 5 minutes, traditional newscast length. And Alexa will just run down all of your favorite news sources. We've been having a flash briefing on Alexa for the last year and a half. So what should we do on Alexa? Here's some of the wrong answers that we've discovered over the last year. So thinking about the Washington Post, thinking about our bread and butter, what should the Post do? Our mind immediately went to the biggest event that was happening last year, the election. And we built a skill, WAPO elections, Alexa, open WAPO elections, that allowed you to do things like ask how a particular candidate was doing, drill down on a state, or even play an on-demand version of our politics flash briefing. And we built it, we launched it, and we saw this huge spike of traffic. We were promoted in the What's New with Alexa newsletter. And then we see, as you can tell, this huge drop-off. Why was that? This launched just before I joined the Post, but thinking back on that experience now, I really wonder if this was the best experience fit. So thinking about somebody in a home, in their kitchen where often Alexa devices are they going to think, Alexa, open WAPO elections and ask, who's winning in Iowa? And we might deliver a response like this, but how does this experience compare, that audio summary that we were just looking at, compared to experience like you might find on 538, for example, where you can see the trend lines, where you can see how things are evolving. It's a much richer experience, and you see, yes, even though you get a number here, is there context, and is it a good experience? And I think this is a great example of where, even though we had a great data source and we could provide that in an audio format, is that truly useful to the end user? Is that something that's going to be delightful? Or is that something that they could be better served in another channel? So one of our big takeaways from that is, how does using Alexa, how does that compare from just pulling out your phone, which again, so many users have access to? Separately, was it just like a realistic use case in the first place? Do people in their homes think about politics and really want to drill down on state-based polling? I don't think so not really. Big takeaway from there, evaluate experiences against friction and potential of other platforms. Again, everybody always has a phone with them. And there was another problem too. First one was that magic word, that invocation name, Alexa, open, what was it again? I remember first joining the Post and was like, how do I access our Alexa skill? And people would say things to me like, oh, it's WP elections, or it's Washington Post elections, or Wash Post elections. And there was so much confusion around that magic word about just even summoning the experience. And I think that might also account where you saw that huge drop-off in the first place, right? Nobody could remember how to get back into that experience after they had seen it being promoted inside of that Alexa newsletter. So that was our first experiment. Our second experiment was the other big event that was happening inside of 2016, the Olympics. So we thought, okay, we've got great data sources for this again, and this is much more of a consumer interest level. There's a lot more engagement. What if you can get schedules, medals, and standings for individual countries from the Post? So we built WAPO Olympics, and yes, we did not learn that invocation lesson at this time just yet. We'll get there. But it would allow you to do things like who won the gold in swimming, or what country's in the lead, or what's the schedule for today. And speaking of automation, thankfully this wasn't much work for us to do at the Post to add on this Alexa layer, because we had built this really robust data system. So we had Olympic results there on the left, just like we had our election votes. And we had built up this internal tool called Heliograph, which is basically this analysis and processing layer that takes data changes and then waits for them, processes them, and then spits the output to multiple platforms like Facebook Messenger, Twitter, Alexa, and our special subsection on our website as well. So it was easy for us to automate. It was just another thing for us to do. We weren't building from scratch on this. But the user experience, let's just take that one thing. Who won the gold in swimming? Alexa, who opened Washington Post elections, blah, blah, blah. Who won the gold in swimming? Do you want results for men's swimming or women's swimming? Okay, sure. Women's swimming. Katie Ledecky did. I want to know how she did last night. Do you want results for women's swimming backstroke, breaststroke, butterfly, or freestyle? It goes on. Women's breaststroke. Do you want 100 meters or 200 meters? Here's the thing about lists and thinking about this technology. Lists are great. In the last panel, they were talking about David Farenthold. He does tremendous journalism with Lisp. He used his notepad to create a list-based visualization of Trump's charitable donations or non-donations. But audio lists are the absolute worst. And the metaphor that comes to my mind is it's like the experience of going into a restaurant and you're looking at the menu and you're figuring out what your order is versus when you have to listen to your server and he's telling you about the night's specials. I feel like I don't have enough information. I feel like I'm kind of confused sometimes about when one dish he's mentioning begins and another ends. It all kinds of blurs into each other. And audio lists are the worst. So there was a lesson there for us. One of them was just to use intelligence to narrow choices and narrow the scope whenever possible. It was probably too much. Could we have picked a smaller slice or made it easier for the users in some way, better set user expectations for how they were going to be interacting with this? And then there was this other issue, which was that even if users had gone through that experience and we had trained them to come back into WAPO Olympics, Amazon started providing this information natively. So you could just say, Alexa, instead of saying this, you could just say, Alexa, who won the most Olympic medals? So basically, all that same work we were doing, Alexa did that at the root level. They did a native interaction, that first category of interactions that we talked about. And there's a big lesson learned for us, which is like, oh, wow, we have to be careful. Because the same things that we think that a user might like, where there's going to be a lot of user attention, chances are Amazon, who owns the Alexa user experience, they're going to want to touch the same things. So big events like the Super Bowl, for example, or the Winter Olympics coming up in 2018, we know Amazon is going to have an eye on the user experience, is going to want to own that at the root level. So we should tread carefully around big open data sets with lots of interest. And by this point, we kind of had an evolving understanding of what this platform looks like. And I put together this chart. The y-axis here is user value. The little clipped here on the x-axis is friction. And we realized, OK, we want to be minimizing our friction, and we want to be maximizing our user value. So we thought, what are some areas we can do that? What are some ways we can really deliver some incredible user value? And around the same time, the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, was talking to our editor, Marty Barron, and they said, hey, what if you could cook with Alexa? We've got a great cooking team, a great food section in the Post. And so they mentioned it. I basically had to hop on it. And so great, we're figuring this out. This is our next experiment. So we thought, OK, let's start off with just a recipe finder. And then we looked at our recipes, and we thought, oh, there's an awful lot here. OK, let's take that lesson we learned last time about narrowing the scope, and let's focus on dinner in minutes. Our dinner in minutes recipes, they tend to be quicker. They tend to be simpler. And it's a better way we can set user expectations. This is just around finding meals and cooking meals for dinner. And then we looked at and when I say simpler, we actually looked at the actual steps. And we saw, wow, these steps aren't so simple. So if Alexa was reading out, for the dish, combine the rice, a pinch of salt, and the coconut milk in a small saucepan over medium-high heat. Once the mixture comes to a boil, it's just an awful lot for the user to keep in their brain at one time. So, OK, we'll rewrite that. We'll simplify it one step at a time. We'll have a user prompt before they go on to the next step. But before launching this to the public, like we did with our other services, let's do some testing internally. So we did some real live user testing with some people here in Washington, DC. And we found it was a total bust. It did not work out well, this prototype tool we created, in a good learning way, though. Big lesson that we learned there is that cooking is not strictly linear. It's not like you just do one thing, finish it, and go to the next thing. You're constantly going back to make sure that you did an instruction correctly. You're checking the ingredient list again. You're not getting all the ingredients at once at the beginning of cooking, for example. You're doing it iteratively, for example. Or you're just finding the way that works best for you and your particular cooking style. There's another issue, is that ingredients, we just talked about lists, ingredients are a giant long list as well. And even just getting users to assemble things was tedious. I think one of the most fascinating insights that came out of this, though, was one of the couples that we were working with. Because we had this Alexa skill and was constantly listening for them to say, hey, move on to the next step, they actually couldn't converse with each other. They couldn't talk to each other. They couldn't have casual conversation because Alexa was constantly taking it, garbling it, and giving confusing cooking advice based on it. They couldn't even they couldn't use Alexa to listen to music, and they couldn't put on the TV for background too, because Alexa would try and process that in some way as well. Big finding there is that there's probably no excellent audio-only cooking solution. And in fact, a lot of those cooking skills that were launched over the last year, I've seen that they actually pulled back on live cooking instructions and capabilities too. Which led us to our current live experiment and our flagship skill, the Washington Post. It allows you to do things like ask for the headlines, play our on-demand politics flash briefing, and play a news quiz. We looked a little bit on that friction scale, and we saw that, playing a quiz game is another way we could have return high user value. And we even had a source for this, the Know Your News quiz. So we hooked it up, we tested it, and users liked it. They said they would totally play it every week. We publish a new edition every Saturday. You can check it out tomorrow. And people did like it, and they did try it, and they just didn't come back, strangely. And what we're learning is that there's this incredible world of possibility with this voice-based assistance. But if you look at it, it's literally a black obelisk. There's no screens, there's no icons trying to get your attention, no notifications telling you pay attention to me. There's this universe of possibility, and do users think about the news in the absence of those triggers and those affordances, without things like notifications? And so our lesson from even as we've launched our flagship skill and as our best yet, and we are seeing a little bit of people coming back, it's not a habit-forming product. You really need repeat experiences, really need affordance and triggers for users to remember that they're there and for them to come back. And a weekly news quiz, while it's great, it's not enough for users to build up a habit. And if you think about the most successful Alexa experiences, they tend to be ones that have those external triggers. I don't want my chicken to burn in the oven, so I'll set a timer. My lights are currently on, I want to turn them off. I'm bored, so I want to play some Beyonce. There's always that external factor involved, and I think we're still trying to figure out what those external factors and those triggers might be for news. So what is working? I mentioned it briefly. Our flash briefing is doing really well, and it's an area that we want to invest much more in. The average user listens to it about 7 times a month, and that's, I think, what that looks like in the actual analytics is that there's a huge number of users that listen to it almost every day, and then there's some users who dabble in it about once or twice a month, for example. But we've got some super users, and that's really incredible because for those super users, we are interacting with them every single day. They're getting that connection point, a daily podcast from the Washington Post. And it's even bringing a new audience in for us. We did some survey recently just asking those users who were listening to the newscast to visit an online survey and tell us about their experience with the Post. And 14%, 9%, 23% of users weren't regular Post audiences. So we were discovering about a quarter of our listenership was a new audience for the Post, which was great. And what I love about this feature, the flash briefing, is that it's a simple habit. You can do it every day, and it just works. And Amazon is doing all that legwork on our behalf. We just need to play inside the ecosystem. But it's just so simple, and it matches user expectations. Alexa, what's in the news? And then they get their flash briefing, and we're along for the ride. If I were to summarize briefly what we've learned, it's that, yes, voice is great. It's the shortest distance between thinking something and taking action on it. Turns out listening is not the greatest. Listening is really lossy and is really inefficient. It's fascinating to think about what that might mean in terms of creating news experiences of the future. And while there's fewer distractions on voice platforms, there's also less things that allow you to complete tasks or bring you back into the experience too. So it's this really new mental model for us working inside of news and how we can deliver inside of it. At the same time, we know that these interactions are only going to grow. And the work that we're focused on now is how can we continue to explore what users expect and what we can provide, and we'll provide a great experience in the long run.